Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here, and today is another studio vlog where I experiment and try out some new ideas and see what happens. The result is this sort of poppy meadow. It's a loose painting, and while I don't think it's entirely successful, I think most of us know how difficult meadows and poppy fields are to paint, so I'm reasonably pleased with this. But just before the demo, a quick promotion for my book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's available to purchase from all good bookstores, and there is a link in the description below if you're interested. Regulars will know that in my studio vlogs I like to explore different ideas and just test out theories and see if they'll work. So what I create in these are experimental, but they're also, they can often be a good starting point for refining to actually eventually get to a better painting. Now today I'm going to be using these Dr. Martens inks in red and yellow. They are richly pigmented Indian inks, and the idea is to paint wet in wet with them and get down some lovely rich colour to start with, and then allow that to dry. And once it's dry, it will be fixed and it won't lift or anything like that, but should retain fairly intense colour for me to then paint with watercolour all my greens around it. So I'm going to wet the area that I'm going to have my poppies in with clean water first in a large wash brush, and then I'm going to introduce a bit of the yellow first to get some sort of glow and some light and a bit of difference into the red, so it's not just one block of red. Then I'll drop the red in and I'll play around with that a little bit until I get it looking the way I want, tipping and tilting my board as necessary, and just sort of then maybe using a smaller brush to dot in a few more defined poppy shapes in the foreground. So my first layer is nearly done for these poppy fields, but I've left it for a minute or so, and just before it dries I'm going to drop in a few dots of red into the damp ink near the foreground. They will sort of spread out and diffuse a bit, but they'll start to give me some sort of poppy shapes, hopefully, and then I can paint some harder dots and layers over that. Right, let's get that sky in. I just want a very plain sky. This is an experiment, so I'm not looking for anything fancy. So large wash brush, wetting the sky all over, and I've just mixed a bit of Windsor Blue green shade with indigo. And I'm looking for quite a grey, sort of late afternoon, early evening sky to create a fairly tranquil scene. Keeping that sky nice and quiet with this sort of graduated wash. That means that the focus is all going to be on the poppy fields. Horizontal brush strokes helps to keep the wash nice and flat or graduated. Now this is a really nice rich mix of sap green and perylene green. It needs to be a drier mix than the sky to avoid making cauliflower marks. So I'm using a fairly rich mix and dotting in a tree line. leaving a few gaps here and there so you can see the sky through it, and you can see that this thick rich paint is diffusing, but it's holding its own, it's staying in place as I use the corner of my brush just to sort of dot in this tree line or the impression of it. I've added some indigo to the perylene green, and I'll just put in some shadows while that's still wet, so these shadows will softly diffuse as well and become a natural base. They'll fade out quite a bit as they dry, using a clean damp brush, a flat brush, just to clean up the edge, maybe spreading across that dark a little bit more. Now this is sap green with a little bit of burnt sienna to neutralise it slightly, filling in my field areas between my lovely bright poppies. Then I'll just play around with the paint, going across the field, going over the ink in some places, just trying to sort of build up this layered effect. I'm now using my palette knife, the tip of the palette knife, to scrape through the rich damp paint, just to start off the vertical stalks and stems of the poppies in the foreground, which hopefully will give me the illusion of some depth of the flowers in this field, especially in the foreground. Then I'm just going to pull out a couple of lighter sort of suggestions of trunks in the tree line at the back. When I'm experimenting in the studio like this, I'm not worried about producing a finished painting. I'm just trying out ideas, and it's just as important to find out what doesn't work as to discover what does work or what I need to refine a little bit or change in order to produce something that I feel is a more pleasing result. But I'm quite enjoying the way this experiment is going so far. It's sort of giving me a reasonable impression of the poppy field at the moment. So I'm just going to keep on following my instincts as I paint and just deciding to try things out, different things here and there. So this is just to get a bit of richness into the foreground. I'm using a bit of cad yellow and a bit of vermilion on a fan brush and just dotting that across the foreground a bit more. And then using the rigger brush to pull down some stem shapes downwards from those stronger poppy colours. Again, just seeing what happens if I try this or what happens if I try that. So now I'm really building up the darks in the foreground using these vertical brush strokes, painting around some of the layers of paint that were there from previously so that I get the impression of this sort of tangle of stems in the foreground to give the field some depth. It might be a little bit heavy-handed, but it is the effect that I want to create here. I think it's a really important part of sort of crystallising the image or the suggestion that I'm trying to create here of this poppy field by having those stalks there. So I'm going to have a quick look, take the tape off, see how it's coming along. It gives me a chance to look at it with fresh eyes, seeing it with a clean white border. And yeah, I'm quite pleased with this as an experiment. It's not a finished painting, but it's a start on the process of actually eventually, hopefully, achieving a really nice poppy field. I think I'm going to just remask across the bottom, lay a piece of paper across the top to protect it, and I'm going to put some stipple drops just for extra texture in the front. So I'm going to use my fan brush and a nice inky consistency mix of my Dr. Martens ink. So this is just the plain red ink. And then I'm also going to flick in a bit more cad yellow, which will hold its own, I think, against the ink. And I'm not really looking for strong yellow marks, but just a few sort of highlights as it marries and mingles with the deeper red and the greens. And we'll see what that's done. Well, I quite like that actually. I think that just adds a little bit more texture, and we've got those nice strong shadows under the poppies at the front. So I'm going to remove that little bit of masking tape that I put back onto the painting to protect the border from the stipple. And finally, once the painting's dry, I'm going to use a chisel-tipped black fine liner to put in just a few little random black centres for my poppies in some of the larger poppy shapes in the foreground. Not many, just a few little shadows here and there. And this just about brings me to the end of this particular experiment, and I'm quite pleased with this because what I've done is prove my theory that using nice strong ink at the beginning of the painting actually works fairly well to produce a strong effect that I can then paint the green into without fear of muddying up the red. So that's worked, and I like the lovely dark greens of the peridine green and the indigo and the sap green against the reds. And I think I'm going to take this idea further. I think it's a really good starting point, and I would encourage you, especially beginners, not to try to paint finished paintings all the time, but to experiment and not to worry if things don't work out. That's part of learning. You won't progress unless you make many mistakes, because that's an important part of learning. You can't get it right without getting it wrong. And I think a lot of beginners don't realise this. They think they have to be painting perfectly every time. And of course, that can make them feel very discouraged. But if you can sort of make friends with the idea that it's fine to make mistakes, it's fine not to end up with a finished painting, you'll find you will progress on your watercolour journey much faster and with more satisfaction. Well, I hope you enjoyed this experimental studio vlog, and that it will encourage you to experiment for yourself and just get the paints out and see what happens when you play around with some ideas to discover what will work and what won't work, things that you can then refine and take further. So if you enjoyed this demo, please click on the thumbs up button, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, we'd love you to join us in our art community here. It's free to do, and it really helps us with our reach on YouTube. And of course, special thanks to everyone that supports us on Patreon. We really do appreciate you, each and every one of you, and we couldn't run this channel without you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.